Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity webinar series focusing on workplace mental health. Just a quick reminder for everybody, as you've seen in the news, there's a test this afternoon of the emergency notification system from FEMA that's scheduled for today at 2:20. So our guest today will probably be talking when all of your stuff and maybe all of our stuff goes off and starts ringing. We'll work through that the best that we can. Just remember, it is just a test. So you don't need to panic, but you'll probably hear a bunch of noise wherever you are and maybe wherever we are coming through at 2:20 this afternoon, about 20 minutes. As you all know, there's a Q&A box on the top of your screen, and you can submit questions at any time throughout the presentation, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. And if you haven't already, make sure you sign up for our emails on our michigan.gov/workplace mental health page. That all of our previous recordings, all of our webinars and other information are posted there, and including this one will be posted there after today. So make sure you check that out. And this is one of two webinars that we'll be doing this month. Very excited about it. As we've always said, we're trying to get quality content. We have some great content for you all today. So this one kind of came up because I was working with our good friend, Dr. Deborah Pinels, a psychiatrist that works with DHHS, and as you all know, because she's helped us so much, a great advocate and asset for the work that we're doing in this space. We were talking early on when we were developing the report and other things that we've been doing about sort of like calendars and emails and some other pieces there, and she let me know that in one of her many jobs with U of M, they had installed some software through Outlook that helped better manage her time, and it would schedule blocks for checking email, and it would remind you if you haven't taken a break in a long time, and it would just schedule one for you where it fit and those types of things. So it's pretty cool. I really liked it. And I was talking to Dr. P, and I said, you know, email for me is a real challenge. I feel really stressed if I don't have it open, you know, kind of scheduling email is a problem. And it hit me like one of those slap your forehead moments. She said, that's because as technology developed so quickly, it trained us instead of us training it to do the work that we needed to do. And, you know, so this has been a concept I've been wanting to talk about for a long time, because at least that piece of the tech that we use kind of adds a lot of stress to my life, and there are other things that we're doing that are adding a lot of stress. So we wanted to definitely do that. We'll have our regular webinar for the month on October 19th at 2 p.m. We'll be talking with the director of the University of Michigan's Poverty Solutions Center about the impact of poverty in our communities and for those people that struggle in poverty. You know, we talked about this concept of trauma quite a bit and how that people carry that with them. Poverty is one of those issues that creates trauma in people's lives that they're going to carry with them and have more likely a chronically stressful situation, as well as potential long-term changes to the way that they deal with stress because of the poverty that they're enduring. And as always, our goal with these webinars is to make sure that we're bringing working people and employers information about issues that are impacting our workplaces, that impacts the mental health of those people in the workplace, and finding ways to address those. And I've talked before about the three pillars we're really kind of focused in on now. Through our experience in this work, we're really looking at things like today in the workplace. This is something that's causing stress, affecting the workplace, or those pieces like we'll talk about with poverty, where that's going to come into the workplace and people are going to carry that with them. And then those individual behavioral health resources that people need to make sure that they're an active participant in their own health and well-being. So our expert today, Dr. Ashley Nixon from Willamette University in Oregon, has researched and written extensively on the concept of technostress as well as other workplace stressors that we're dealing with across industries, across the spectrum. And I'm really excited that she can join us today. Dr. Nixon has also agreed, she doesn't know what I got her into yet, to become more of a supporting member of our kitchen cabinet, people that are helping us really drive this work forward, making sure we're identifying the correct issues, identifying the right resources, and putting things together in a package that makes sense for the people that are joining us today and that we try to talk to throughout the state of Michigan. So thank you so much, Dr. Nixon, for all that you're doing, and thank you for being here today. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I am absolutely thrilled to be joining you all. I'm here to talk to you about two things that I've been passionate about for a really long time. I've been studying stress in the workplace for about 20 years, and I have been working with management students as well as local organizations trying to increase practices in workplaces that facilitate mental or psychological health of employees. So I could not be more happy to join you. I'm going to try to get through a lot of information, but keep it relatively simple and hopefully very useful. I want to start with explaining what we mean with when we study stress, when we talk about how stressors impact us within the workplace. I then want to think about how technology has impacted some of these stress dimensions in a broad way, and how this is related to some specific techno-stressors, such as the anxiety we all feel when we're not constantly connected to our email inboxes and responding almost immediately. And then finally, I want to get to strategies that we can embrace as organizations, as individuals, as managers, to try to address techno-stressors that exist within our workplace and deal with those a little bit more helpfully. So within the work stress framework, we think about this, most of us use the lexicon of I'm stressed. Work is stressful right now. What we mean when we study that the model that a lot of our results come from posit this stimulus response process wherein something is occurring at work that is causing me to have a physiological emotional reaction. And so we've studied a wide range of these, and I wanted to walk you through some of the most prominent that end up being really important for technology-based stressors as well. The first is workload. Workload can be qualitative or quantitative. I can have a lot of work that I need to do. I can also have extremely challenging work that I need to do. And it's usually when those two things occur at once that it becomes so problematic for us. We can also have social stressors in the workplace. This comes up as conflict. My goals are being thwarted by somebody else, so now we are arguing with one another, or we may not like each other, or in some way we're just causing each other friction. Additionally, this can be mistreatment, where someone says something rude or nasty to somebody else. And so if we've had days where you're like, why did they treat me like that? You've experienced mistreatment. And these can be things that we perseverate on quite a bit. Work-life conflict. This is a role conflict where the obligations and the role that we fulfill at work interferes with our non-work roles, right? And this can be taking care of ourselves, taking care of our families, connecting with friends. All of these things that happen outside of work tend to be things that we really value, and oftentimes they get crowded out by our work role. And the opposite can happen, where things are going on in our personal life that make it very hard for us to be effective in our work roles. And then finally, we have workplace constraints. This ends up being one that we're all used to, but actually has a tremendous impact on us. When something is going on, a policy, equipment, something in the workplace that is stopping us from being able to successfully reach our goals. We find this profoundly frustrating, which brings me to the next point. When these things arise, we typically have or frequently have a negative emotional response. This can be anger, this can be anxiety, this can be frustration. It can also be very deactivating emotions like sadness or discouragement. This negative emotional response occurring is actually critical because this is what triggers our threat response, in which our sympathetic nervous system decides that we are under threat and sends all of our resources to our extremities. This is our fight or flight response. When I am responding to these stressors in the workplace, I am prepared to run or hit, but I am not prepared to go to sleep, to eat and digest food well, to make rational commentary at a meeting. All of these things that are critical for us to do in the workplace tend to align with our parasympathetic nervous system, not our sympathetic nervous system. Now, our bodies are designed to do this. So having this effect occasionally is not really that big of a deal. We want our body to be able to respond to threats like a normal human should. The problem is when they become chronic. And that's what leads to some of the most significant strains that we're concerned about when we experience workplace stress. If my boss is rude to me one day, I may very well have anger that day. I may very well have reduced job satisfaction that day. But so long as my boss isn't rude to me every day, my body's going to be able to recover from that. When these things are occurring all the time, we end up having long-term consequences that are quite substantial. So the nervous response, the fight or flight response, actually suppresses our immune system. So if you've ever been really busy at work and then gotten a cold, that is because you were really busy at work. That is a stress response of your body, or a strain, and how our body is helping us react. We've also heard a lot about burnout lately, right? This long-term consequences of these stressors continuously happening make us feel like we can't be good at our job. They make us depressed. They make us less able to empathize with the people in our life who we need to empathize with to maintain healthy relationships. If I am tired because I've been stressed, or I am distracted because of a stressor that's weighing on me, I'm far more likely to be injured or have an accident in the workplace. And the last strain I really wanted to highlight for the purposes of our conversation today is withdrawal. And we can think about this in some ways as technology-enabled withdrawal. We can withdraw from the workplace by being absent, but a lot of us, particularly if we're working from, on computers as knowledge workers, tend to withdraw from work by doing something unrelated to work, or by just working more slowly than usual. We can see how this would be a natural consequence of stress. If I'm not sleeping well, I'm not going to be working very productively. But we can also think about it as an active response to stress. I am really angry at my organization that they haven't fixed this constraint. And so instead of working on this right now, I am going to go read this news article or check out this social media website. In extreme cases, we may leave the organization, right, withdraw entirely, either to take a job somewhere else, or in very extreme cases, to go take time away from work and recover on something like FMLA or disability. So this is the general broad understanding of work stress that we have known and studied in workplaces for decades. And so what we want to do is start thinking about how this interacts with technology. So we can start thinking about how we work, where we work, what we do for work, how we're connecting with people at work, how we're managed by our bosses at work, and how we manage other people at work, how we're monitored and how we're evaluated. Technology has really changed the nature of work substantially, but I want to narrow us in a bit on specific technostress dimensions. And so I've divided these into three big buckets. The first is the instrumental impacts that work has on us, so the direct impact on the nature of work and how that might cause us stress. The second is this idea of constant connectivity. For many of us, we check our emails first thing in the morning and last thing before we go to bed at night. And this has a lot of implications for how we're interacting with our non-work roles, as well as our ability to disengage from work and allow our bodies the rest and recovery they need from the stress that they experience during the day. And then lastly, we have technology-mediated communication. And this is communication that typically lacks all of the non-verbal information that we get from one-on-one communication. And it tends to allow for our biases to come out more and for disrupted relationships to occur more frequently. So a little more specifically, one of the rises that I saw during COVID that made me particularly sad was the use of surveillance on employees who are working in remote environments. We have known for a long time that surveillance has a lot of negative impacts on employees. It is a really constant stressor when I know that I'm being surveilled at work. And so all of those strain responses tend to be flaring up here. A lot of anxiety, depression, hypertension, even physiological disorders like carpal tunnel syndrome occur more in organizations where surveillance is being engaged in. There's a second phenomenon that happens here, which is just an interesting quirk of humans. We are communicating to our employees that we do not trust them when we engage in surveillance technologies. And it turns out when you let a human know that you don't trust them, they actually stop behaving. They don't feel as much need to behave in trustworthy ways. So the other thing we saw a rise of in COVID is people buying technologically based solutions to deal with their employer surveillance, oftentimes in the form of something that would jiggle their mouse and keep their computer engaged if they had to step away for any period of time. But this really creates this very deleterious relationship with organizations and employees where I don't trust you, I'm creating this chronic stressor for you, you're angry, you're depressed, you're anxious, you're ill, and also you're behaving in ways that probably you would not normally do. And so you might even start internalizing some guilt and additional stressors from things like that. With scheduling practices, we've seen the advent and the use of scheduling products that are technologically derived and being used by organizations to minimize the costs associated with having employees in the workplace. This has been done in ways that end up creating unstable work environments and work hours for employees. So erratic hours, more on-call hours, potentially required overtime. And again, we've got a long history of knowing that these things are really horrible stressors for employees. They're associated with a lot of strain, and they're also associated with a lot of negative organizational outcomes, reduced productivity, higher turnover. So these are not good for organizations, not good for people, and so in general, bad for society. Yet this is something that's frequently brought up as Starbucks stores are unionizing. The scheduling practices that are being implemented disrupt my life and disrupt me from being able to actually work part-time and access some of the benefits, the reason I came here to work. And the last one, I won't talk about too much because it's techno constraints. And I'm sure everybody on this call has had the moment when their technology did not connect, shut down unexpectedly, did something that otherwise ruined your day. With constant connectivity and techno stressors, we end up having that work-life conflict, right? I technically could have the freedom where I could do my work from anywhere, anytime. And what we find is people are doing their work from everywhere all the time. And so we're seeing a rise in workload, we're seeing a rise in work hours. And on the other side, we have the consequence of this. We're disrupting our lives, we're disrupting our relationships. We are not showing up the way that we wish we could in some of those relationships. If I'm checking my email right before I go to bed, chances are I'm thinking about it for a while. I'm not giving my body the rest that it needs because I'm up thinking about work. And so we start to become more exhausted, we start to make more errors, we start to be less productive, and we end up with some significant long-term health consequences associated with that. And then lastly, I mentioned mistreatment and conflict earlier. When these are facilitated by technology, we again lack that nonverbal communication that helps us understand what someone means. If I say something to you that is direct, but I'm smiling at you and I'm making eye contact and I'm clearly indicating that I care about you, it's very different than if I say that same thing in an email. And so we have two biases that come up and are particularly prevalent here. One is the human negativity bias. This is in all of us. When we are confronted with neutral information, we tend to interpret it as though it's a threat. This made a lot of sense evolutionarily. If something's moving in the bush, I should probably run away if I want to be alive. It makes a lot less sense when I'm using this same mentality to interpret a coworker's email to me. So this is something that's been with us for a long time and tends to make our interpretation of neutral communication far more negative. There's also something called toxic disinhibition, which is when we are willing to say things that are far meaner, far nastier when we're communicating through technology-mediated forms than we would if we were face-to-face. So the problem with building relationships now through technology is that we in fact are meaner than we normally would be. And even when we're not, people are seeing us as being nastier than they normally would. And so this leads to a general increase in the likelihood of disrupted relationships in the workplace. So now that we've got this kind of understanding of some of the major techno stressors, hopefully the ones that you experience were part of this list and maybe some new ones that you hadn't thought about yet, I wanted to spend a couple of minutes just talking about what we can do better at work to try to help people address these. And I want to give a shout out to the U.S. Surgeon General's Framework for workplace and mental health and well-being. I think historically we've done a good job at looking at the protection from harm construct. And as we think more about how our psychology impacts everything about our ability to work, our ability to show up in our families and our communities, hopefully we start moving past just protection from harm and realizing that we're all going to be better off when we take all of this into account. Now, what this specifically means for technostressors is that we all have a role to play. Within the government or policy, we can start thinking about integrating technological changes into standards for safe and healthy workplaces. This has started happening where we're seeing some predictive scheduling laws, we're seeing some employee monitoring laws, but we're also seeing the opposite. You're not allowed to have those in this area. And most of the laws that have been passed around this are at the city level. Indeed, Oregon, the state, is the only state that actually has a predictive scheduling law on the books. So we can start thinking about what are the changes that we need to make at the legal level to make sure that employees are being treated well and they're able to stay in the workforce for their entire career. While we have some slow motion on that, we can certainly be out there educating and reaching out to employees and employers about why some of these practices that seem easy, that seem like they make financial sense, that don't seem like they would have anything negative entailed, really do. And they have big costs associated in the long term with their use. And so the more we can provide that information, the better decisions we're going to see made in organizations. A lot of it is going to come down to the leader. They need to be able to create a culture in their organization where there is psychological safety, where there is trust, where there is justice. A lot of this is going to be communicated to the organization by the leader role modeling this behavior. When it comes to technology, are they creating boundaries around work? If my leader is responding to an email at 1 a.m., no, they're not. They're communicating to people that they should always be available. And so thinking about the culture that we want and how we can demonstrate that to our employees. I know at Microsoft, the CEO used to go around a few years ago and tell everyone at about 6 o'clock that they should be going home. And so thinking about those acts that can do something major to recreate our cultures. We want to make sure that we're investing in the things that we say matter to us. If good management practice and technologically enabled work is something that matters, we need to be training for it. We need to be providing for part-time workers or for some flexibility and control in scheduling. And finally, to support people when they actually need these resources. I'll skip over the role of human resources, but the important thing I want you to take away from this is that culture the leaders created should be incorporated in our practices and policies within the organization so that it's clear to everyone in every aspect of our organization that these things matter. Finally, for the role of managers, we need to be able to promote collaboration and help employees manage technostressors. An important ingredient for this is trust. We're not going to be able to coach folks or support them very well if they don't trust us. So finding ways that we can connect with our employees about these things and help them come up with strategies to mitigate technology stressors or to eradicate them or to take the time they need to recover from them are the critical keys here. And then I intentionally saved the role of individuals for last because this is the one where organizations invest the most, but it doesn't matter if we're in an environment where we still have the same expectations. We need to change the environments and then these individual behaviors become less important. But if we think we're going to fix this by getting everyone to practice personal resiliency, we're going to be in the exact same place we are now 20 years from now. But the things that we can do if we are in an organization that is not so enlightened is making sure that we're protecting our diet, our sleep, and our ability to exercise. And so that's really our personal resiliency. I always encourage people when presented with neutral information to assume positive intent and start asking ourselves those questions of what else could they have meant? What could they have meant that might have been positive? to establish our own work-life boundaries, and then to get the support that we need to implement them. I set reminders to remind me at about 5:30 every night that if I'm still working, I need to be winding down. And fortunately, my husband's good at letting me know when I need to stop as well. So that social support is really helpful. And then the last thing is to realize that this is just part of our humanness. So we really want to be able to use the support systems that are available to us and not feel like we shouldn't access those things because it means something negative about us. And now I'll be quiet and answer any questions you might have. Thank you so much for your attention.
Well, you were right. That's a lot of great information in a short amount of time. I think we got a couple of questions about whether or not the slides would be available. Do you have a problem sharing those with us?
I do not. I would be more than happy to.
Okay, so for those on the email list, we do a recap, which includes the video, of course, from today, as well as any slides if we have those. So we'll try to make sure that we have those included there so that people can refer back to them. I think a couple of things I wanted to touch base on too that I really liked and I try to tackle in my own existence is that first off, one thing that really drives me nuts with email is that it's turned into like a messenger and not really letter writing, so to speak. So you're getting all of these dings all of the time with just like a one-sentence question or something else that probably it's fine, but we have other tools for that kind of back and forth communication. I got to tell you all, whoever invented the cell phone with all the email and stuff on it can kiss my behind, for lack of a better word. Probably shouldn't say that on the webinar. Comps team's going to be mad at me, but that constant dinging, that constant recycling, and the stress that creates for all of us too. But one thing that you said too was the bias, and this is something I really try to tackle with myself, and I saw it pretty early on with email, is that I tend to read email in a tone of how I feel about the person that sent it. And if it's positive, it doesn't matter what they write. I don't see anything negative. If it's somebody that I have challenges with on an interpersonal level, then I'm really negative. Is that kind of the norm?
It is. In fact, I recently had someone tell me they managed to effectively change their response to getting messages from their boss by adding a smiley emoji to the individual's contact information in their phone. So whenever they got an email or a text from this individual or a call, a smiley face popped up. And that made them feel less anxious about responding to these things and opening them.
Yeah, and we see these funny things like that now, smiley faces, a lot of exclamation points, all of these tools that we're trying to use to show a more positive tone. I think we're doing that as we're writing as well.
Absolutely. 10 years ago, I would have told you to write it like a professional letter. I don't make that recommendation anymore. I think we should be going out of our way to try to communicate the emotional tenor that we're hoping someone is reading this email with.
So we talk a lot about mental health, and we talk a lot about managers, and I talk a lot about this concept of trust. She brought up trust with the managers. And one thing that I always add to any discussion I'm having with management representatives is that if the first time you're engaging with somebody is when you think there's a problem, you're too late. Like the trust has not been established. So do you have any recommends on like how managers or even us as individuals should focus in on how we build that trust ahead of time?
I think getting to know people is a really important thing, and it's hard to do in the virtual environment, but really trying to take that time to create space to get to know someone as an individual. There's also this powerful thing that we can tell people how to interpret our behavior. I need to have a conversation with you, and let me just say from the get-go, my intention is to understand your perspective, to help you iron out any issues, because I really want you to be successful here. It is remarkable how profound that statement can be, even if what you go on to talk about is a negative performance behavior. And so setting that and letting them know your intentions explicitly can be really helpful as well. One of the challenges I see for managers is we are managing, the size of your team is about the same that it always was. Yet if I'm having to manage people in the virtual environment based off just their work inputs, right, not trying to surveil them, it becomes much more challenging for me to do that with a wide span of control or a large number of employees, as opposed to having smaller teams that we could actually manage more effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one last thing before we kind of wrap up for today is I really love you highlighting this concept of health and safety. I think the more we've learned about it, the more we're talking about mental health. It's really hard to even suggest that these are two separate issues, right? That when we're looking at the workplace, we have things like you demonstrated, surveillance, scheduling issues, there are more that we know are mentally harming people. That we have to look at more holistically than we may have in the past, where we were only concerned about physical well-being. What do you kind of tell employers out there when you're trying to bring those concepts together?
One of the most important things that we have found to help people be resilient in the face of stress is the feeling of control. Giving employees a voice within the organization, even if it's, like if I am a night shift worker, I know I have to work night shifts, but within that, are there things that can be done that would give me a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more control, and wouldn't really cost the organization anything? So the idea is to kind of open the door for that dialogue, because we, not being in the role, make assumptions about it that are often just based on fraudulent beliefs, right? Or certainly our own perspectives. And so making sure that there's that open, honest dialogue, empowering employees to know that we value them and we care about their opinion, is one of the most profound things we can do. And it's free. It doesn't take anything for us to start this conversation and to create the environment where an employee knows that if they have a concern, it will be heard and attended to.
Yeah, and if anybody's joining us today that is a shift worker, just know that shift work by nature is causing you challenges, just so you know that. We're just not designed for that. We understand it, the economy, all that kind of stuff, but it creates other challenges. But just thank you so much, Dr. Nixon, for joining us today. Great information. So glad you're going to be helping us continue to develop our work moving forward and integrate more of this type of information into the work that we're doing. And thank you all so much for joining us today, and look for the follow-up email. We'll see you in a couple of weeks on October 19th.